Hi, my name's Isabel, and today I'll be talking about gambling as a disorder, but a little more focused on how it's apparent in gacha games. So I'm sure we've all seen the gambling in casinos, like pulling on the lever on the slot machine, or passing by poker tables. But there's a lot of different kinds of gambling, and the one I want to focus on in gacha games is an online form of that, and like it says in the name, it's a game. So, gacha actually comes from the term gachapon, which refers to the small vending capsule machines in Japan where you put a coin in and get a random prize out. Now, how does that translate into being a part of a game? Let's take a look at a short clip. Alright, so to explain a little bit more what's happening, the way gacha games work is that you have an amount of in-game currency, which is right here, that you can use to pull on these two buttons here for a limited time character, weapon, or any other item. So in this case, it's a limited time character. And you can earn the in-game currency through playing the games, but there are options to spend actual money, as you can see right here. The more you pull, the chance of gaining the character or weapon or whatever it is you want gets higher, and this is what we refer to as the pity system. It gives the player a sense of control over the outcome, even though it's still all completely by random chance. There's also something called gambler's fallacy, where if something has occurred several times before in the past, it will occur less often in the future or vice versa. It's a mistaken belief that past events can influence future ones, but in reality, they're completely independent of each other. For example, if you flip a coin and it lands on heads 5 times in a row, you would think that it's guaranteed to land on tails this time, but because it's been on heads for so many times, but this is not true. So when it translates to gambling, it's kind of like the one more pull and I'll get it mentality, in the same way you think, one more time I pull the lever on the slot machine, and this time it's sure to be it. So gambling was actually reclassified from pathological gambling, which is an impulse control disorder, to a behavioral addiction in the current DSM-5. Right now, it's currently defined as persistent and recurrent engagement in gambling behavior that leads to clinically significant impairment or distress. Gambling is a non-substance associated addiction and is instead associated with cognitive distortions. Like I mentioned before, it's common to have the one more pull mentality in gambling, but that's also similar to something that you would say about alcohol or cocaine or tobacco. Well, now let's talk about some of the ways that gambling actually becomes addicting. You can actually look at gambling as a form of operant conditioning, where gambling behavior is positively reinforced by getting some kind of reward, whether it be the character you want or the character that you don't. It's the mentality that you want to keep going until you get more and more rewards. In that way, we can also talk about it being a variable ratio schedule of reinforcement because there is an unpredictable number of times before you get a reward. You could possibly get a character after 70 pulls or after 30. Another idea is what they call the illusion of control, where near misses and personal choice give some gamblers a sense of control. Gamblers then have inflated confidence when given the opportunity to choose for themselves and end up gambling more because they really believe that they can do it. So we've talked about some of those ideas, but what actually happens in the brain as you gamble? So some brain circuits, particularly those involving the ventral prefrontal, ventral striatal, and limbic regions, may contribute importantly to reward-related decisions that drive gambling behaviors. But obviously, we also have to talk about dopamine. Dopamine is sensitive to behavioral stimulation, especially when it comes to monetary rewards. It also codes reward anticipation and outcome evaluation. Those basically refer to the activation of dopamine prior to and after the reward, respectively. Robinson and Burrage made the incentive sensitization model, which explains the quote-unquote wanting and the quote-unquote liking aspects in addiction. The more you gamble, the more the wanting increases in comparison to the liking that decreases. But dopamine is what is associated the most with the reward processing system, and is what we call the dopamine rush that really gets us more and more addicted to the feeling of gambling. Some other neurotransmitters that are also associated with gambling are norepinephrine, which plays a role in arousal and excitement, and serotonin, which plays a role in impulse control. Now, let's take a look at what some research says and dig into the gambling and gacha games specifically. So, what makes someone more susceptible to being a problem gambler? People who have a family history of it are going to be more at risk, just like any other problem of addiction. In addition to that, behavioral factors like inattention and conduct problems are also associated with more in-game item purchases and symptoms of problem gaming and gambling. Furthermore, based on a study done, male gamers tended to spend more on in-game gambling as compared to female gamers, which then puts them at risk to be a problem gambler. Although there was also evidence that more females were in the high-risk group than males. In general, too, gamers with habits of online gambling and other similar activities also had a higher risk of developing a problem gambling disorder. What are some motives to gambling? Based on a study, some motives that existed in significantly higher proportions in the high-risk group than in the lower-risk groups related to things like stress relief, like wanting to feel relaxed, gaining social recognition, and wanting what their peers have. Not only that, some people use gambling as an escape-type coping strategy, and this is also associated with the higher risk of gambling disorder. And while others are just going to try to make up the money that they lost because their ego or the despair of losing so much drives them to do this. But there are many detrimental effects that problem gambling can have, like depression and anxiety. Both of these were often reported to be associated with more spending on gambling, as well as symptoms of problem gaming and gambling disorder. Not only that, other disorders like bipolar disorder can go along with gambling disorder. So a lot of times it's not just one issue, but a multitude of them piling on top of each other, so it's important to address them all. In general, looking at the effects of gambling along with the gaming aspect, there are some conflicts in conclusions. So on one hand, too much gambling, especially in a game where time is necessary in order to gain in-game currency to pull if you don't want to spend money, can lead to loneliness, social isolation, a lack of ability to normally interact with others in person, and so on. On the other hand, others say that playing these games with others can promote teamwork, competitive team organization, language learning, and exposure to all sorts of ideas. Alright, so what are some of the treatments? The most common treatments for gambling disorder are behavioral therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. Behavioral therapy aims to expose you to behavior that you want to learn in place of what you are doing, in this case gambling, and teach you skills to reduce the urge to gamble. So CBT not only touches on that, but also looks at your mentality, so maybe your motives for gambling and any other underlying issues. This type of therapy focuses on replacing that negative mindset with a healthier one instead. Otherwise, there's also medication like antidepressants and mood stabilizers. Like I said before, many issues can be associated with gambling disorder, so these medications can hopefully help with those other issues that lead to the individual coping by gambling. To wrap things up, only an extremely small percentage of people really have a gambling disorder. In fact, in America, it's about 1% or less than that. Most people are all right to gamble recreationally once in a while as long as it doesn't become a problem. Overall, gambling is apparent as we see it conventionally in casinos, but also in the games that we play. And for the most part, it's fine in moderation, but we've seen based on what happens in the brain and a lot of the negative effects that it's extremely important to address when it becomes an actual disorder. Thank you for listening to my presentation, and these are my works cited.